The dirty details from the assistant coaches on the defensive side of ball, more explosives when it comes to the offense, and is Joe Rossi a top 10 defensive coordinator? We're talking about that today.
Hey,
you are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Now, yesterday we didn't have an episode, but we are going to do one tomorrow on Saturday, so a little bit of a shake-up here in the schedule. But today we're talking football, tomorrow we're talking basketball with a new addition and some Jamison battle rumors out there. So we're going to dive into that tomorrow. Be sure to hit subscribe so you do not miss it. Now, this is the show where we always continue to row through the rain, through the shine, through the ups, through the downs, and that comes to each and every sport. Now, be sure to give this podcast a 5-star review wherever you get it so others can find out about the show as well. And I am loving it over on YouTube, where more comments are getting generated depending on the topics we're talking about down in the comments. But I love interacting with you all. I love the interaction between you all. And I need to know, and we're going to touch on it in the third segment of the show, but is Joe Rossi a top 10 defensive coordinator? I am going to dive deep on that one coming up, but I need to know your thoughts and I need to know why. Drop them in the comments below. But before we get there, before we talk about that, we are going to talk about the other defensive coaches on this staff, the defensive assistant coaches. We had 3 of them along yesterday's presser where we got to talk with them, and we don't get their insights too often when it comes to actual pressers. So it was great to be able to ask these coaches questions and kind of get different views, different perspectives, early thoughts on some of these players as we're getting started in the spring session. Now, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, when talking to these assistant position coaches, there was a lot, and I mean a lot of excitement about young guys making their way up and putting things together, and coaches talked about Coleman Bryson. You can check out that video over on my Twitter at Gophers Kane Rob. Otherwise, we heard a little bit about Darius Green and some intriguing things there. Not only is he dynamic and he brings maybe a slightly different approach than Jordan Howden when it comes to aggressiveness and physicality in the play. Jordan Howden was more patient, Coach Collins talked about, whereas sometimes Darius Green can be more aggressive and more physical up front, especially trying to get into the run game quick, but sometimes they got to wean him back a little bit and he's still growing into the role. So it's cool to see that in coverage wise, he sees a lot of similarities, a lot of great things from both of them, but different play styles, different energies that come from the two players as well. I am intrigued for Darius Green, who will likely be starting across from Tyler Nubin and being that other safety pair. Coleman Bryson coming up in that Tyler Nubin role, and I think we'll have a huge step next year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the field this season as well. They'll find ways to get him in there and active because his ball tracking skills and his ability to get to the ball and win the ball are just, they're up there. They're second to none. They are up there, and you see it each and every practice. You saw it in the bowl game where he housed that pick last year. We saw another pick in this last practice. He gets it done when it comes to ball tracking. Now, other young players that were mentioned by these coaches were Devin Eastern, Anthony Smith, Rylan Kelly, Tariq Watson. I have videos of all of those coaches discussing those players over on my Twitter, so I won't rehash that here. But even Aiden Gowsby got some love from Coach Collins. So I loved hearing about the youth. I loved hearing about that prospective and good clay to mold. And there's a lot of upside, and Tariq Watson being super fast and a jitterbug, Rylan Kelly being super long and having a lot of raw talent to be a great corner in this Big Ten level of play. And it was great to hear these type of things. It was encouraging to hear these type of things, especially when we have a lot of players hitting the transfer portal that were maybe some of the older vets that either were playing major minutes or were looking to play major minutes, most likely, at least from the fan perspective. That's what it looked like. But then you see these guys hit the portal or whatever is going on there, and some of it, not all of it, but some of it can be attributed to these younger guys really pushing for more opportunities, ready to take the next step, taking in coaching in a different manner, and being able to capitalize and come more consistently to each and every workout, each and every spring session, each and every, you name it. So that is where you start to see some of these guys like, hey, my job is kind of on the line, and not everyone's going to stick it out. Not everyone's going to be like, you know what, I'll take a backup role, or I will play less minutes than I took in the last couple of years because it's for the betterment of the team, or this person has been outworking me or whatever. Some people don't see it like that, especially in today's transfer portal age. And that's been discussed by Coach PJ Fleck. That's been discussed by fans alike. We've talked about it here. There is a lot of opportunity out there at different schools. So why sit if you can go and start somewhere else? If you're not the right fit here, if you don't see the opportunity that you're looking for at that school, you get one time to transfer without any repercussions. So you're going to see more and more players take advantage of that. And is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't know if it is. You know, coaches can move without any real consequences. And we've been on the benefit of that, and we've been on the negative of that. And you know what? It's happened for years now, decades now. But now the players are starting to get that as well. Now, should there be maybe more rules, more structure to it all? I could see a case for that. I could see an argument for that, but that's not the case right now. So we're living and adjusting in the world that we have and the rules that we have to play by, which means these guys are going to hit the portal at times, and we have to adjust and move forward from there. And we'll be on the benefit of that as well sometimes with players coming in from the portal. But what I enjoyed the most with these assistant coaches and these position coaches when talking about some of this was mainly talking about the vets and talking about really people stepping up to the plate in new ways and being pushed. And Coach Debo mentioned Kyler Baugh on more than one occasion. We're going to get into that right now. So first, we're going to talk about what Coach Debo brought up, the new defensive line coach, Winston De La Tibidere, and he talked about Danny Sturgout being a very vocal leader in the room from the jump. And he talked about how he's been pushing Kyler Baugh and seeing more from him as well. Now, not only was that encouraging, but then we look at Coach Monroe with the cornerbacks talking about Justin Wally and the type of player he is and what he can be. And here's a quick blip on what he had to say with Justin Wally as well.
He's a really, really, really good football player. Got a chance to be a great one, an elite one. He really does. I love the way he works off the field, the unrequired. You know, he lives in the meeting room watching extra film after practice. He's taking those young guys aside under his wing. They're working on things that they need to work on. Again, the unrequired, right? The things that are outside the meeting room, outside the weight room. He's got a special gift now. I cannot wait to see him perform live on Saturdays. Really impressed with his whole makeup from this point.
So you're seeing veterans stepping up, the excitement being around these veterans, the potential being around these veterans. And it's not just them. There's other players that can look to continue to get into the grind of things and take the next step. And Joyner was brought up by a friend of the show, Ryan Burns, and Coach Debo had a couple detailed words, which I love to hear the perspective of what they are looking at, both and Coach Debo. So here's what he said on Joyner.
The biggest thing for right now is going to be how critical he is of all of his movements. So when we come in and watch film, sometimes it's just me and we'll sit down and I'll say, hey, you see that wasted movement right there? Hey, you see where your hand is right here? Look at your foot placement when you make that bite and go. Look at your foot placement on that jab when you're coming inside. So for him to finish the rush, that's what we're calling it, finish the rush, he's gonna have to be really critical of all his movements in totality and not just focus on one part at a time.
Now, the final clip I want to play for you is Coach Debo once again talking about Kyler Bato, because I think it's really special how he compared it, how he looks at it, why he liked Kyler Bato's how. And instead of diving into those details for you, I'm going to give it to you straight from Coach Debo. The last clip I have for you from yesterday's presser right here.
Oh my gosh, that dude just goes. And like looking back at everything, in 2019, we talked about guys who really had the how. I'm like, Kyler, like the first day I walked in and watched how you did everything, it impressed me. So now we've just got to continue to build on that. The thing with Kyler now is, though, he's always going to give 100%, so I'm going to push him to 101. Then when he gives 101, I'm going to push Kyler to 102. And you guys, we might get to the last game of the season, you might see Kyler at like 231%, okay? Because we're going to keep pushing him because it's not good enough anymore. But that's just what the standard dictates. I'm so excited for that guy to play this year, and he's going to be absolutely relentless.
Now, in the end, it's hearing about all these intricacies, all the detail work that should excite fans. Everything feels very intentional. And not only that, but if the Gophers want to remain a top 10 defense in the country, then they're going to need these players to really step up, take those strides, make the next level in leadership, make the next level in production on the field, and helping bring the best out of these younger guys as well. That is what is going to help keep this defense in those top 10 type ranks. And you know what? These coaches are privy to that. And so I am excited to see what will happen with all of this. There's still so much time before now in week 0 where we play against Nebraska. I believe it's week 0. Maybe we play week 1. Either way, we play Nebraska first up. And there's a lot of time from now until then. And it seems like this class, this group, this team is very, very, very diligent and hardworking. So how fast they can absorb that material, how fast they can get it right, get it tight, and get going, that is going to be huge for this defense, getting to the caliber that we've seen it for the past few seasons under defensive coordinator Coach Rossi. Now, all of that to be said, it doesn't seem, it seems like even without a bevy of names that have a ton of hype, a ton of high upside, high potential, maybe those guys that you see on the preseason all conference lists that'll get a nod, like a Tyler Nubin, like a Cody Lindenberg. But one thing that this defense has is that they have an ultra refined and ultra unified staff. So maybe we don't boast all the fancy names that'll get the preseason All-Americans or preseason all-conference mentions, but this staff seems really locked in. And that's not to say that prior staffs weren't there. They weren't as unified. They weren't as good. That isn't to say that at all, but you just don't get the same feel with this group in these pressers and in these practices and in that pro day, just getting to talk with these coaches about the new group of coaches, about the new staff, about the new chemistry within these coaches. And it's not just me who thinks this. In fact, Coach Joe Rossi talked about it in the presser after Tuesday's practice, and I wanted to be sure to throw that in here. So I guess I lied to you earlier. There is one more clip, but I want you to hear about what Coach Rossi thinks about these new hires, and also about maybe not hiring the all-star names and having an all-star cast, but the right cast. And that's what it seems this Gophers team has. So we're going to hear from him right here.
He's really the poster child of what the program is. So now he goes away and he starts to coach, but don't undervalue his detail and don't undervalue his coaching ability. He's miles ahead of where a coach at his age would be. And then with Monroe, I've known Nick for a long time. We've recruited against each other. I've always respected his recruiting. When I was out of football in 2016, I went and I visited like 13 or 14 different schools, and I went and visited Syracuse, and I sat in on this meeting. And I thought he did an exceptional job. And so you're always making mental notes when you get an opportunity to get around people. So I knew he was a good recruiter, but then I saw how well he coached and how great of a teacher he was, and his energy and how loyal he is. And those things are important. I asked a question once to a sitting Power 5 head coach. I said, "How do you hire staff?" He said, "Look," he said, "it's not about hiring an all-star team." He said, "We can hire an all-star team." He goes, "And then that staff won't work together." He says, "It's about getting the best group together." And so Winston and Monroe are a perfect fit for our program, perfect fit for our defense. So I've been really pleased with those guys.
Details, grinders, mutual respects, longtime bonds, history. All of that blended together, that can really take this defense, and even without maybe all the blue chips or anything like that, take this defense to the next level. And that's saying something because the defense has been a top 10 unit for the past 2 years now. So if they can still put that together and have these younger guys that they're excited about, have these vets that are starting to take bigger roles, all step up to the plate with a unified staff like that, look out. Now, the final thing I will say on this defense is hearing from Coach Joe Rossi about what the new takeaways, the 3 main takeaways from last season are, and what will be the focus as they continue to improve this year. The first was man coverage. The second was the underneath zone coverage. And the third was the pass rush. Now, we've heard about this. We've definitely heard about the pass rush along the way, but those are where the defense will look to improve. And this defense has been a top unit in the country for the past few years. I've mentioned that already. But on the flip side, what has the offense been? It hasn't been one of the best in the country for the past few years. They've been very effective in the ground game, but can they shift it? Can it get more pass heavy? What is it going to look like? And could the offense see a significant jump? I believe so, and especially in one key area, and that's what we're going to talk about coming up next. First, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And the NCAA tournament is heating up with the Final Four officially taking place this weekend. And it starts today with the women's Final Four, and there's no better place to go for the action than FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is offering new customers a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. So definitely head on over there, because it's for any bet that doesn't win. Your first bet that doesn't win, you can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets on a safe, simple, and secure app in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can go to FanDuel.com today /lockedon and sign up to claim your first no sweat first bet. Again, don't miss your shot at this no sweat first bet, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com /lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Gophers fans, thank you so much for listening to Locked On Golden Gophers and making us your first listen when it comes to Gophers daily sports. Now, we got to talk about this offense. We got to talk about the hype. We got to talk about, could they see a significant jump in production, in upside moving forward, and maybe the hardest schedule they've played in Coach Fleck's time with the program. Now, that isn't to say the Gophers can't find success with a more difficult schedule. In fact, I think they can still put up an 8, 9, 10 win season next year, but it has to come together quickly over this offseason, and it has to come together the right way. Now, the upside is there, but when you look at the Gophers, especially when it comes to passing, we know that they've been low in passing attempts, low in passing yards per game, and low in passing yards in general. In fact, when you look at the passing attempts, they have only been above the 3 naval academies, or the 3 armed forces academies, I should say, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force teams. On top of this past year, they were ahead of New Mexico State, UConn, and one other school, I believe. That's it. That is the only schools they were ahead of, or the only programs they were ahead of in passing attempts when it came to the FBS. That's 131 teams. They were ahead of like 6. So not good. I mean, you can't worry too much about passing attempts on their own, but you still got to get the looks. You got to get the opportunity, especially when you have a highly ultra talented quarterback like the Gophers have right now, which they haven't had in quite some time, with the talent that Ethan Kaliakmanis has in pure natural talent. Now, when you compare it to even looking at the Wisconsin program last year, the Gophers weren't that far behind in yards per game. In fact, they were 1 yard per game different than Wisconsin. And overall yards, they had about 50 attempts less than Wisconsin, and only about, I think, 9 or 10 yards difference between the two. So it isn't a huge gap there, but you're doing that on, I think it was like almost 50, 60 attempts less. So what are you doing there? I mean, how do you take the next step? You got to push, you got to let your quarterback throw it a little bit more. And that doesn't mean you get away from the ground game. But like I've said on past shows, and if you haven't heard it yet, the Gophers have never been in the top 100 Of the 131 schools now, it was 130 prior with FBS designations. The Gophers have never cracked the top 100 when it comes to PJ Flex time here with the Gophers. And I think this is the year where that shakes up. I think this is now the time to make it happen and shake up. But even in 2019, where they had a great, efficient passing game, they were still 110th in passing attempts. Now you look at these schools that are making the playoffs, the college football playoffs, even a lot of the schools that are making the high New Year's Six bowls, they are not only in that top 80 in passing attempts, but they also find the production in the ground game now in defense. Now, Minnesota's got the defense part down packed for the most part. Minnesota's got the rushing game down packed for the most part, but we have to give our passing game more opportunities to find a little bit more balance, find a little bit more of giving defenses more troubles, more to work with, more to look at, more to have to prep for. Because if a defense can throw more cover ones and more man coverages on the Gophers because we can't create separation, because we don't take the shots and things like that, then it only hurts the ground game. Now, it doesn't always hurt the ground game when you have an all-world running back like Mohamed Ibrahim, but we don't this year. And there are still things to be learned with this running back room. So spacing it out, creating more chaos for defenses and more ways that they can't grasp, they can't defend easily. When you have a guy like Daniel Jackson, Chris Ottman-Bell, Brevin Spanford, and some of the transfer guys coming in to really space out a defense, that should open holes in the ground game. That should open shorter opportunities in the pass game. That should open up shots downfield. So being able to throw the ball more is going to be huge for this Gophers offense. I do think, even from seeing that first practice available to the media and fans, I am optimistic that Minnesota is going to pass the ball more. You saw a little bit more throughout the practice, deeper shot attempts, quick reads, stuff underneath, different screen game looks. Now, I'm still hoping to see more of the actual running backs involved in that screen game. Didn't see too much of that, if any of that, I believe, in this first practice. I'm hoping we see more, because all of these running backs have the ability to catch the ball. So hopefully we can get a little bit more variety and diversity in that offense, in the play calling, and seeing more looks, but it does look promising from the very brief sample size we've been given. Now, with all that, keep in mind, more shots could mean more turnovers. If you're taking more opportunities, more risks, more deeper looks, more one-on-one jump balls and things of that nature, it could lead to more turnovers, but that is what this offseason is for. That is what spring practices are for. Spring game, fall camp, all of that is where Ethan Kaliakmanis should be taking these shots and figuring out what is the edge, what is the limit, what is where's the risk. Start learning the risk and understanding them, how to use risk management right now and what you can get away with. He has that special arm. He has the ability to throw off platform, the ability to fit it into a tight window. So start learning how tight of a window. Is it Coach Fleck talked about it in the presser, most quarterbacks can throw a 1 ball, a 2 ball, a 3 ball. But what Ethan is working on and what he's really trying to grasp is, what does a 1.2 look like? What does the 2.2 look like? What does a 1.4 look like? A 1.6 look like? All of those very small, minute details and intricacies to fit it in the right spot. And what can you get away with? And what can't you get away with? How far is too far? That is going to be critical for his success in this season. Because the more he understands that, and the more he knows of how he can get away with something, or where he can place something, or how tight it needs to be in these certain areas, in these certain portions of the field, in these certain situations. Sometimes maybe you take a bigger risk because of the given situation you're in. Other times, maybe you're playing more conservative and only taking calculated risks. So that is going to be huge. That is going to be pertinent. So keep in mind, you might see more turnovers, especially in this offseason play, maybe even in the early season play, but it will work itself out. And it is not necessarily a bad thing, especially in the offseason. Now, once we hit the games, it can start to be a bad thing. But I think Ethan is a very smart quarterback. Ethan is a very talented quarterback. I think he will understand very quickly throughout this process and get a gauge for it, get a feel for it. So that should be intriguing in itself. Now, one thing I do want to say with Ethan Kaliakmanis before we move on to the talent in the rooms itself is that his confidence is there, and it is tenfold. He looks very confident out there in the practice that we've seen so far, in some of the video clips we've been given from the program so far. I'm excited because we saw his confidence. We saw his swagger against Penn State in his first start ever. We talked with his dad last year on the show a little bit and talked about that's always been an element for him. He's a gamer. He likes to go do it. He has fun doing it. He's always going to push himself to be better. He brings in criticism and he encourages criticism so he can learn and move forward from it. So that is something you can just see on the field. He's confident. He has that swagger about him. He knows he's that guy. So that is exciting as we move forward as well. Now, nothing says for certain that Minnesota absolutely is going to pass the ball more, but it's at least hopeful to see when you're seeing it in these practices a little bit more, when you're seeing the additions that they brought into the team, when you're seeing the talent and the ability of the quarterback, when you're seeing the ability of the receiving game in the running back room, on top of the talent at the tight end position, on top of two offensive coordinators, maybe seeing elements at a different approach than what we had with Kirk Ciarrocca in a similar system. Now, Minnesota's still going to run the ball. Straight up, that's going to happen. And one thing Ryan Burns mentioned to Daniel House and myself at the last practice was that Sean Tyler actually has been a running back who's only really seen about 15, 20 reps a game. I think he said 15, but I'm not exactly sure on the number, and I didn't check it before I started recording today, but he's only had above that 15 or 20 number on 3 occasions. Outside of that, he's really limited in his touches, but he gets a lot done in those touches. What that really tells us is he is efficient as heck. There will be other producers in this running back room. It won't be a workhorse type system like we saw with Mo Ibrahim. And it speaks to the explosion that he brings. So not only are we going to see deeper shots, more shots in the offense when it comes to passing and explosion on that front, but I think we're going to see a lot more explosion when it comes to the running game and the ground game as well. And it's not just from Sean Tyler who can get it done, but also Zach Evans who can hit that second gear in a hurry. You're talking about 2 running backs that have high key explosion, that can hit the home run play, that can bring it big. And that is something we haven't really seen from the Minnesota running backs in quite some time. Now, I love Mo, you love Mo, but being a burner who breaks off huge touchdown runs just isn't something that happened. In fact, when he broke off most of his big runs, he was usually caught or tracked down, which, again, I love his game, and that's just not his style of game. But Sean Tyler and Zach Evans do have that home run hitting ability. In fact, when you're looking at the running backs of last year's room and Sean Tyler, you can see the difference in explosion and the breakaway percentage straightforward in the stats over at PFF. So Ibrahim had 15 plus yard runs in his 5 years on 868 attempts. He had 60 of them, 15 plus yard runs. That is a breakaway percentage of 33.3 in his career. Then you go over to Trey Potts with the 15 plus yard runs. He had 17 of them on 219 attempts. That's a 31.9 breakaway percentage. Then you move to Bryce Williams, who had 9 of the 15 plus yard runs on 227 attempts with a 22.6 breakaway percentage. So you're talking about 22.6, 31.9, and 33.3 for breakaway percentage in runs. Then you flip over to Sean Tyler, who's had 45 breakaway run or 15 plus yard runs on 495 attempts, but has a breakaway percentage of 43.1%. That's 10% more than what we saw from Mo Ibrahim, who led in that department for the Gophers. Like I said, Sean Tyler has explosion. He has that extra burst, that extra second gear, that extra speed. And I think we are going to see that in a new light. We're going to see maybe less pound, but more efficient bursts from the run game in this next year. So when it comes to the offense overall, I feel fairly comfortable with Minnesota this year when it comes to talent, when it comes to personnel, when it comes to depth. And I think they can really take the next step and explode and be more productive as an offense as a whole. But honestly, it comes down to play calling and it comes down to decision making for me. Now, when we flip that over to the defense, it's a little bit different. I don't worry as much about decision making. I have a lot more faith in that. And I like the top end talent on the defense, but the depth of the team right now is unknown, and the unknowns of the younger players themselves and how they will produce presents more of a worry for me. So a little bit different on each side of the ball, but when it comes to the defense, like I said, play calling is no worry for me at all. In fact, We're going to talk about, is Joe Rossi a top 10 defensive coordinator? And I have an absolute take for this one that you are absolutely not going to want to miss, because if you don't think he's top 10, you are 100% wrong. In fact, he might even be top 5. First, a message to you from our friends over at Built Bar, and the Built March Madness tournament is happening, and it is going to conclude soon, so don't miss your chance at some huge prizes. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite Built Bar. That's all you have to do. You go over there, you pick your favorite one, and it's as simple as that. You put that, you register an email with that as well, and you could end up being one of the 50 lucky Locked On listeners that get a free Built Bar box. And not only that, but one lucky Locked On listener, that's right, just Locked On listeners, will win a 12-month subscription to Built and have the best Built Bars delivered to your door each and every month. You gotta try it. 100% wrapped in real chocolate, good for you, power packed with protein. It doesn't cost you a thing. So go over to BuiltMarchMadness.com, vote for your favorite one, and enter the drawing today. And then head on over to Built.com to restock up until you're that lucky winner. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about here at Locked On Golden Gophers today is Coach Joe Rossi a top 10 defensive coordinator in the country? And PFF seems to think so. In fact, they recently released a list, and they said that Joe Rossi came in at number 7 in the nation. Their top 10 was Iowa's defensive coordinator at number 1, Michigan's at number 2, Jim Knowles of Ohio State at number 3, the pair over at Georgia for number 4, Penn State's Manny Diaz comes in at number 5, Matt House of LSU comes in at 6, Joe Rossi of Minnesota at 7, Tony Gibson at North Carolina State at 8, and then Ole Miss's Pete Golding at 9, and finally Cincinnati's Brian Brown at 10. Now, of those, Iowa at number 1, it makes sense. Georgia in the top, go ahead, it makes sense. You're going to find them in a lot of the top categories. I mean, for Iowa in 2022, they had the number 1 in defensive touchdowns. Actually, I think they had it in the last 2 years. They were top 10 in first downs defensively. They were top 10 in pass yards allowed. They were top 12 in rush yards allowed, and they were in the number 2 scoring defense. Georgia, you can find them similar in all of those categories as well. So I'm not arguing any of that whatsoever. But then you go over there and you look at Jim Knowles, who came from Oklahoma State and then had Ohio State last year. You've got Minter, who came from Vandy, which his Vandy year wasn't astounding, but whatever. But he gets paired with a blue chip program over at Michigan, and he does well. In some categories, he led ahead of the Gophers. In some categories, and others, he was behind. Now, the talent difference there, pretty vast, but we're not going to talk about that yet. But what I'm saying is, so sure, with Ohio State's, with Michigan's, sure, I'll give it to you. Iowa and Georgia, yep, it makes sense. Go ahead. That's 4 right there ahead. But maybe Manny Diaz from Miami and now at Penn State, maybe you can make a case. I'll let you make an argument there between Minter, between Diaz, and between Rossi. I think there's an argument to be had who could be the 5th one there. But having the LSU Matt House coordinator in front of Joe Rossi is an absolute disrespect, absolute no-no, and that is 100% helmet scouting. I want you to tell me how or why, because he has more blue chip talent and nowhere near the type of success that Joe Rossi has seen with Minnesota. In fact, if you look at it, in 2022, Joe Rossi's group with Minnesota was 4th in points allowed per game, 15th in rush yards allowed per game, 8th in pass yards allowed per game, and 5th in total yards allowed per game. And they were the 4th most efficient team on third downs when it came to defense. Now, if you flip and look at Matt House of LSU's, he was 45th in points allowed per game, as opposed to the Gophers' 4th. He was 70th in rush yards allowed per game, as opposed to the Gophers' 15th. He was 40th in pass yards allowed per game, as opposed to the Gophers' 8th. And he was 47th in total yards allowed, as opposed to the Gophers' 5th. Get out of here with that mess. You're only looking at, it's LSU, it's SEC. Nah, get that trash out of here. Joe Rossi is definitely in front of him, which puts him right there in the top 6. And I think he has an argument with the top 5. And if that's not enough for you, you can go look at Minnesota in 2021 as well, where they're 10th in points, where they're in the top 10 again in rushing yards allowed, in top 15 or top 20 in passing yards allowed. And they were up there in scoring defense. I don't want to hear it. Minnesota and Joe Rossi have been way better than what you saw from Matt House at LSU. And what did Matt House do in 2021? Oh yeah, he wasn't even a defensive coordinator in the college football world. He wasn't a defensive coordinator. He was a position coach in the NFL, which cool. I'll give it to you. Props. You did good with the linebackers over at KC, but you've done nothing to show that you are a better defensive coordinator than Joe Rossi. So I'm not having that. Joe Rossi is easily in the top 6, in my opinion. I think you can make an argument in the top 5 when you look at Jesse Minter, who is 5th in points, 3rd in rushing, 22nd in passing, and 3rd in total yards with Michigan. You're right on par. You're maybe 1 or 2 positions behind them, a couple, and way ahead of them on the passing one. So you can make a case, especially when you're talking about the difference in talent and the difference in blue chip prospects that are coming from Minnesota as opposed to Michigan. So I think there's a case for Joe Rossi to be in the top 5. He's absolutely in the top 10. If you don't think so, you're crazy. And all of that is just to let you know that, yes, Joe Rossi is not only a top 10 defensive coordinator in the nation, but I think there's a strong case for him as a top 5. And that isn't, I haven't even really dived into the difference of doing those high level numbers with less blue chip high school prospects. Long-term development has been huge. Hard workers who work for the Gophers have been huge, and they've turned some of these guys into professionals at the NFL level as well. Rossi's guys love playing for him, and they ball out for him, and he has proven it year after year now that he is one of the best in the business. So that's going to do it for us today on Locked On Golden Gophers. I appreciate you listening, and thank you once again. Now, what do you think? Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Joe Rossi top 5, or is it solely top 10? I want to know the thoughts in the comment, but be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow, we will talk about Mike Mitchell, new transfer coming in for the Gophers basketball team, and we're going to talk J-Mo because there's a rumor out there and it cuts deep. I'll see you then. Row the boat. Skyima. Go Gophers.